All right, Shalom. This is the brother lawyer,
It's the law.
Shamar, from the GMS Miami camp, giving all praises to
Yahweh,
Bahashem,
Yahushai.
the honors to the elder apostle of Great Millstone, and salutations to all the Akim out there pushing the word of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, and truth and sincerity. Today we're going to get into another time capsule number 8, concerning 3 particular pharaohs mentioned in the scriptures. And we're going to get into a little history concerning those pharaohs, linking up the scriptures with, the actual records of these various pharaohs. So without further ado, we'll start at 2 Kings 19:1.
This is 2 Kings 19:1. And it came to pass, when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord.
Right, and what this is talking about, basically in the previous chapter in 2 Kings 18, Sennacherib was going to come and siege Jerusalem. Okay, Sennacherib had already destroyed Lachish, and he had already burned a lot of the cities of the southern kingdom of Judah with fire. He had already sieged them and defeated them. So he was on his way to come to Jerusalem, which is the capital, which is the holy city. And while he was on his way, Hezekiah heard that he was coming, and Hezekiah was afraid. So go ahead.
It's verse 2. And he set Eliakim, which was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. And they said unto him, Thus saith Hezekiah, this day is the day of trouble, and of rebuke and blasphemy, for the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth.
Right. So this is basically talking about the trouble and the tribulation that the house of Israel was going through at the moment, because they had been sorely defeated, and Hezekiah basically sent his men to go speak to Isaiah about how much travail they were in as a woman giving birth to a child. Go ahead.
And it may be the Lord thy power will hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria his master hath sent to reproach the living power, and will reprove the words which the Lord thy power have heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left.
Right. Rabshakeh is the ambassador of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and the king of Assyria basically sent Rabshakeh to Hezekiah and to Jerusalem to let them know, just surrender, and be our slaves, be our tributaries, or we're going to destroy this city with fire. Okay. Forget about trusting in the Most High. Forget about trusting in your allies, the Egyptians. So that's basically what's going on here. Go ahead.
Verse 5. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah and Isaiah said unto them, Thus shall ye say to your master, Thus saith the Lord, Be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and shall return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land.
Right, and when you go later into the chapter, the king of Assyria came with his army to Jerusalem, and while he's on his way, the Most High sent an angel to destroy a large amount of his army, so he had to retreat and go back to his land. I believe it was Nineveh that he went and retreated back to, and he ended up getting killed by his own people. Okay, so that's how the Lord delivered Hezekiah and Jerusalem from the army of Sennacherib the Assyrian. But the point is in the next 2 verses. We're just reading this so that at least we have a historical background of what's going on here. So go ahead and read verse 8 out.
Verse 8. So Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah. Warring against Libnah, for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish. And when he heard say to Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, Behold, he is come out to fight against thee. he sent messengers again unto Hezekiah, saying, Thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, Let not thy power in whom thou trustest deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria.
Right. So here it is. You have a king of Ethiopia by the name of Tirhakah. Okay, and this king ended up waging war against the Assyrians, coming up basically into the Middle East and fighting against the Assyrian army. So Sennacherib, before he came to fight against Jerusalem, he had to go and handle that problem with the king of Ethiopia, who was also a pharaoh, of Egypt at the time, before he could turn his back and go to Jerusalem and fight, because Tirhakah was interfering with what Sennacherib was doing at the time in the Middle East. With that being said, we're going to go into some articles concerning this particular King Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia. Khan. So the article is on the website www.examiner.com/article/Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia. Okay, and the title of the article is Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia. So let's scroll down, brother, if you don't mind reading at Tirhakah. Go ahead.
It says, Tirhakah or Tirhakah began as a king of Ethiopia and then as a pharaoh of Egypt.
Right. So as we read in 2 Kings, there was actually a man by the name of Tirhakah who was an Ethiopian king over Egypt. Okay. So go ahead.
The Bible mentions him only once, and with the incident that occurred long before he took command in Egypt.
Right, because he wasn't reigning in Egypt over Egypt during the time that the event in 2 Kings 19 took place. He was actually an Ethiopian king, but later on, the Ethiopians ended up conquering the Egyptians, and they actually had a dynasty ruling over the Egyptians for a period of time. Go ahead.
But that one act profoundly affected the course of history.
Mm-hmm.
The date of birth of Tirhakah has never been established. The biblical narrative provided by Isaiah chapter 37 verse 9 and Jeremiah 2 Kings 19:9 says, Sennacherib, who was at the time viceroy of Assyria under King Sargon II, was laying siege to Lachish in the kingdom of Judah when a report reached him that Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, was moving to attack him. If this is Tirhakah, then he was not king of Egypt at that time, but could have been reigning in Ethiopia and definitely commanded an army. James assert the annals of the world quote the ancient historian Strabo as saying that Tirhakah sent a relief army to harass the Assyrians at or about 710 BC. This harassment appears to have succeeded. Sennacherib withdrew his forces to meet this threat, but then returned to make another attempt to capture Jerusalem and lost the full strength of 185 regiments, literally 185,000 or Alpahim, to a never identified plague.
That's right. And that's basically going into the angel. But as the brother read in this article, there was a man by James Asher who claimed to have quoted Strabo, saying that Tirhakah, who Strabo is an ancient historian, that Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, sent an army to harass the Assyrians. Basically, the reason why this happened is because Israel at the time, when you actually go into the history, and when you read 2 Kings 18, 2 Kings 19, you go into Isaiah, Hezekiah is admonished by Rabshakeh not to trust in the Egyptians, not to trust in all those other nations, because why did Rabshakeh say that? Is because Israel actually had an alliance with the Egyptians, okay, and with the dynasties of Egypt at the time. But besides that, That's a good article, but I wasn't actually able to find any quotes from this specific historian Strabo. So what we're gonna do to help compensate for that is to show that in history there was a pharaoh by the name of Tarhaka. There was a king of Ethiopia who was also the king of Ethiopia that actually had a lot of contention militarily with the Assyrian Empire. Okay, and how the Assyrians dealt with that problem. So we're going to go to the next link, formerthings.com /tarhaka.htm. And brother, if you don't mind reading under history.
All right. History. Tirhakah, also spelled Tirhakah, Tirhakah, Mantheos, Tarakos, was king of Egypt and a member of the Nubian or 25th dynasty of Egypt.
Yes, the reason why it says that is because, like mentioned before, Tarhaka was a Cushite, okay, and he came into Egypt and took down the dynasty that was reigning at the time, and him and his dynasty began to reign over Egypt, even though they were foreigners. Right?
Whose reign is usually dated 690 BC to 664 BC. He was also the son of Pei, the Nubian king of Napata, who had first conquered Egypt. Scholars have identified him with Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, who waged war against Sennacherib during the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah.
Khan. So, yeah, you can actually keep reading. Go ahead and read that paragraph right under it.
It was during his reign that Egypt's enemy, Assyria, at last invaded Egypt.
Now, why was that? The reason why that was because of the interference of Tarhaka previously in history. During the time of Sennacherib, Hezekiah, and Sargon, you had Tarhaka interfering with Assyria's military campaign in the Middle East, because Assyria was a world power at the time. They were trying to consolidate their power, and they didn't want any adversaries. Okay, they didn't want any interference from any other nation in that region of the world. Because if there was any interference, then there would have been revolts and rebels and revolutions against the Assyrian Empire, and the Assyrians didn't want that. So as payback, later after the reign of Sennacherib, you have Assyria invading Egypt under the successor of Sennacherib, whose name is Asarhaddon. Go ahead.
Asarhaddon led several campaigns against Tirhakah, which he recorded on several monuments. His first attack in 677 BC aimed to pacify Arab tribes around the Dead Sea, led him as far as the brooks of Egypt. Esarhaddon, said that right, Art?
Yeah, Asarhaddon.
Asarhaddon invaded Egypt proper in Tirhakah's 17th regnal year. After Asarhaddon had settled a revolt at Ashkelon, Tirhakah defeated the Assyrians on that occasion, but 3 years later, 671 BC, the Assyrian king captured and sacked Memphis, where he captured numerous members of the royal family. Tirhakah fled to the south as Esarhaddon recognized the political scene in the north, establishing Necho the First of the 26th dynasty as king of Sais.
Right. So here it is. You have it that the Assyrians ended up defeating the pharaohs of that pharaoh of Egypt and ending his dynasty. Now going further down into this article, just to get a little bit more details on it, there's actually records from the ancient world about how the Assyrians did indeed fight against Tirhakah, king of Egypt and Ethiopia, and it's in a particular group of inscriptions, ancient inscriptions called the ancient Eastern text, and it's called Anet or Anet, as you see on the screen. So, brother, I would like you to read, if you don't mind, start reading at I fought daily.
I fought daily without interruption, very bloody battles against Tirhakah, king of Egypt and Ethiopia.
Right, that's going back to the enmity that was between the Egyptians and the Ethiopian dynasty and the Assyrians. Go ahead.
From the town of Ishherpri as far as Memphis, his royal residence, a distance of 15 days' march. I fought daily without interruption, very bloody battles against Tirhakah, king of Egypt and Ethiopia.
Right. So during Tirhakah's reign, when he finally did reign over Egypt, you had the Assyrians, pretty much putting a foot in his rear end. Even though this heathen was our ally at the time, this is for edification's sake. So yeah. So there you have it in the scriptures. You have Tirhakah mentioned. And then you actually go into the history, and there was actually an Ethiopian king ruling over Egypt called Tirhakah. So with that, we're gonna move on to the next pharaoh, and the pharaoh is by the name of Pharaoh Nicole. And before we do that, you can have anything that you'd like to mention?
No.
Okay, so the next scripture would be in Jeremiah 46:1.
All right, this is Jeremiah 46:1. The word of the Lord, which came to Jeremiah the prophet, against the Gentiles, against Egypt, against the army of Pharaoh Nicole, king of Egypt, which was by the river Euphrates in Carchemish, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, smote in the fourth year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. Order ye the buckler and shield, and draw near to battle. Harness the horses, and get up, ye horsemen, and stand forth with your helmets. Furbish the spears, and put on the
brigadines.
Wherefore have I seen them dismayed, and turned away back, and their mighty ones are beaten down, and are fled apace, and look not back, for fear was round about, saith the Lord.
Right. So basically, in this chapter, Jeremiah 46, 1-5, Jeremiah is prophesying against the Egyptians, particularly Pharaoh Nicole of Egypt, about how they were going to go and have a battle at Carchemish by the river Euphrates with the king of Babylon at the time, Nebuchadnezzar, or as it's written in this particular chapter, Nebuchadnezzar. And basically, the Lord's putting the spirit on these Egyptians to go to battle and lose miserably. Go ahead.
Verse 6. Let not the swift flee away, nor the mighty man escape. They shall stumble and fall towards the north by the river Euphrates. Who is this that cometh up as a flood, whose waters are moved as the rivers? Egypt raiseth up like a flood, and his waters are moved like the rivers. And he saith, I will go up and will cover the earth. I will destroy the city and the inhabitants thereof.
Right, because the Egyptians at this time, later, much later on, after the whole incident with Tirhakah, the Egyptians were actually in league or allied with the Assyrians much later on, and the Babylonian Empire was rising, and since the Egyptians had a problem with the Babylonians rising into power and gaining power in the Middle East as well as Assyria. The Assyrians also had a problem with that. They joined together and they went and to go fight against the Babylonians. And as we read on, they eventually lost. So go ahead,
Come up, ye horses, and raise ye chariots, and let the mighty men come forth. They be the Ethiopians and the Libyans that handle the shields, and the Lydians that handle and bend the bow. For this is the day of the Lord power of hosts, a day of vengeance, that he may avenge him of his adversaries. And the sword shall devour, and it shall be satiated, and made drunk in their blood. For the Lord power of hosts hath a sacrifice in the north country by the river Euphrates.
Right, and that sacrifices the Egyptian army along with the Assyrians. And the reason why the Lord said it was a day of vengeance is because when you actually read, in 2 Kings, I also believe it's in Chronicles as well, about how Josiah came against the Pharaoh Necho of Egypt at Megiddo, and Josiah got killed because he was interfering with what was going on, and the Most High didn't tell him to do that. This is the same Josiah that had the great Passover, that's famously recorded in the scriptures. The battle was a bloody battle, and both sides had a lot of losses. So Pharaoh couldn't continue his campaign against the Babylonians at the time. So on his way back, being angry, he took the rightful heir to the throne out of power, and he placed someone else, the brother of the heir, on the throne, and then he put taxes upon the nation of Israel, and the nation of Israel became his tributary. So as vengeance for doing that, as revenge for doing that, the Lord stirs up Necho to muster up an army to go help the Assyrians fight against the Babylonians, and they get their butts kicked across the Euphrates River. The next verse that we're going to read concerning this battle is in 2 Kings 24:7. Before we get into the article,
this is 2 Kings chapter 24 verse 7. And the king of Egypt came not again anymore out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken from the river of Egypt unto the river Euphrates all that pertained to the king of Egypt.
Right, so the king of Babylon here is Nebuchadnezzar, of course, and Nebuchadnezzar ended up defeating the Egyptian army along with the Assyrians at the Euphrates River at Carchemish, right? And he chased their army all the way down. He obliterated them all the way down to the river of Egypt, which is the Nile River. Okay, so he had taken all that land, and the Egyptians were too afraid to come during this time that this event in 2 Kings 24 is being recorded, because at this time, if I'm correct, Nebuchadnezzar was getting ready to siege Jerusalem for the first time, and at that time, our people, the Israelites of Judah, they were confederate with the Egyptians. Okay, they were tributaries to the Egyptians. Okay, so the Pharaoh was too scared to come and help us because of what the ass whooping that Nebuchadnezzar put on him first time. So moving on, we're gonna read the account of the battle from Wikipedia, the Battle of Carchemish, and brother, if you don't mind reading that first line there.
The Battle of Carchemish was fought about 605 BC between the allied armies of Egypt and Assyria against the armies of Babylonia, the Medes, Persians, and
the Scythians. Right, the Babylonians, the Medes, which are Japhites, the Persians, which are Elamites, and the Scythians, which are also Japhites, if I'm correct. Go ahead and read it. Down to battle, Khan. Salakia.
The Egyptians met the full might of the Babylonian and Median army led by Nebuchadnezzar II at Carchemish, where the combined Egyptian and Assyrian forces were destroyed. Assyria ceased to exist as an independent power, and Egypt retreated and was no longer a sufficient force in the ancient Near East.
Significant.
Like significant force in the ancient Near East. Babylonia reached its economic peak after 605 BC.
Right. So here it is in the record of the battle. It talks about how Nebuchadnezzar did indeed defeat the Egyptian and Assyrian army at Carchemish. And as you see on the screen, the background pretty much goes into the Battle of Megiddo between Josiah and Pharaoh Necho. But right now we're pretty much just focusing on the Battle of Carchemish. So could you go to the records of the battle, please?
All right, records of the battle. The Nebuchadnezzar Chronicle, now housed in the British Museum, claims that Nebuchadnezzar crossed the river to go against the Egyptian army, which lay in Carchemish. They fought with each other, and the Egyptian army withdrew before him.
Right. So even in Nebuchadnezzar's Chronicles, because in ancient Babylon, the kings used to have these chronicles on clay tablets. In Israel and various other parts of the world, it was on papers or scrolls or on walls. But the kings of Babylon and the Cushites and Mesopotamia, they would write them on clay. And here it is in his own records. It talks about how he fought against the Egyptian army at Carchemish, and he pretty much won. And that victory is what allowed him and the Babylonian Empire to really rise into power, because they took down not only the Assyrian Empire, which was the world power at the time, and absorbed their empire into the Babylonian Empire, but they also were able to weaken the Egyptians so much by that defeat that Egypt, which was a powerful nation at the time, in spite of the Assyrian army being there, couldn't further interfere and be a significant force in the Middle East.
Boy,
go ahead.
He accomplished their defeat and beat them into non-existence.
Salakia. Sorry.
As for the rest of the Egyptian army, which had escaped from the defeat so quickly that no weapon had reached them, in the distance of Hamath, the Babylonian troops overtook and defeated them, so that not a single man escaped to his own country. At that time, Nebuchadnezzar conquered the whole area of Hamath. The battle is also mentioned and described in the Bible, in the book of Jeremiah and 2nd Chronicles.
So we just read the account in in Jeremiah, Salakia, and we read the results of that in 2 Kings 20:24. So you see the Battle of Carchemish, the article on the page from Wikipedia, and as you see now, Nebuchadnezzar's Chronicles are also on the screen on a Wikipedia website, if you brothers want to check that out. So the last pharaoh we're going to deal with is a pharaoh who was contemporary to King Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, and in the Bible this pharaoh goes by the name of Pharaoh Hophra. So I'll just read this last part. In Jeremiah 44 and the 30th verse, it reads, "Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will give Pharaoh Hophra, king of Egypt, into the hand of his enemies, and into the hand of them that seek his life, as I gave Zedekiah, king of Judah, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, his enemy, and that sought his life." So here it is in the scriptures. We have a pharaoh by the name of Pharaoh Hophra, okay, who was prophesied by Jeremiah to be taken into the hands of his enemies that seek his life, and basically his enemies would kill him in the same manner that Zedekiah had his enemies' hands, Salakia, put on him. Because when you read the story of Zedekiah in the scriptures, Zedekiah had his sons killed before him, and he had his eyes plucked out, and I believe him and his family were carried off into Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. So I'm going to go to an article in Wikipedia, and this article is about a pharaoh by the name of Apries, Okay, and this is who is called Hophra in Jeremiah 40 and 30. So I'll read. It reads, Apries is the name by which Herodotus and Diodorus designated Waibri or Abre, Pharaoh of Egypt, the fourth king of the 26th dynasty of Egypt. He was equated with the Waprius of Manetho, who correctly records that he reigned 19 years. Apries is also called Hophra in Jeremiah 40 and 30. Reading on, it says, Apries inherited the throne from his father, Pharaoh Salakia, Pharaoh Samtik II, in February 589 BC, and his reign continued his father's history of foreign intrigue in Judean affairs. And basically, the reason why that was is because actually, when you go into the article, when you continue reading it, it talks about how Apries was an ally of Zedekiah. Okay, and Zedekiah was hoping that the Egyptians would be able to help him against the siege of Babylon, but that didn't turn out well, as you brothers all know. So reading on, Apries was an active builder who constructed additions to the temple of Apries, Bahariah, Oasis, Memphis, and Sai. In year 4 of his reign, Apries' sister Aknes Neferbri was adopted as the new god's wife of Amun and at Thebes. However, Apries' reign was fraught with internal problems. In 588 BC, Apries dispatched a force to Jerusalem to protect it from the Babylonian forces sent by Nebuchadnezzar. His forces were quickly crushed, and Jerusalem, following an 18-month siege, was destroyed by the Babylonians in either 587 BC or 586 BC. His unsuccessful attempts to intervene in the politics of Judah was followed by a mutiny of soldiers from the strategically important Aswan garrison. I'll read that again. His unsuccessful attempt to intervene in the politics of the kingdom of Judah was followed by a mutiny of soldiers from the strategically important Aswan garrison. So, Apries' reign, when he first started ruling, everything was going pretty well. But after him and his army was defeated by the Babylonians, his soldiers were unsatisfied by his ability to rule. Okay, they didn't trust his ability to rule anymore, so they betrayed him. Okay, and that's going to fall right in line with Jeremiah 40 and 33, because these very same soldiers end up betraying him, and it ends up causing Apries or Pharaoh Hophra his life. Moving on, it says, while the mutiny was contained, Apries later attempted to protect Libya from incursions by the Dorian Greek invaders. By his efforts backfired spectacularly, as his forces were mauled by the Greek invaders. So again, another failure. Apries sends his military to Libya, which is in northern Africa, and he gets defeated by some Greek soldiers and invaders. Him and his army gets absolutely badly destroyed there. And moving on, it says, when the defeated army returned home, a civil war broke out between the indigenous Egyptian army troops and foreign mercenaries in the Egyptian army, right? Because when you read up on Apries, he had his Egyptian soldiers, and then he also had foreign mercenaries, which were of Greek lineage, that were part of his army. And the reason why the civil war broke out is because his native Egyptian troops felt like he was going to turn his back on them. Okay, so there was a civil war between the Egyptian army and the foreign mercenaries that were under his command. Okay, at this time of crisis, the Egyptians turned in support towards a victorious general, Ahmosis II, who had led the Egyptian forces in a highly successful invasion of Nubia in 592 BC under Pharaoh Samtik II, Apries' father. Ahmosis quickly declared himself pharaoh in 570 BC, and Apries fled Egypt and sought refuge in another foreign country. So the Egyptian army, the native Egyptian forces, turned to a general of the Egyptian army to be their pharaoh, and they basically declare him pharaoh and don't consider Apries their pharaoh anymore because of all his pharaohs. Because of all his failures, they're disappointed in him, so they turn on him for a successful general who served under Apries' father. And Apries, when he found this out, he fled to Babylon. Reading on, it says, when Apries marched back to Egypt in 567 BC with the aid of a Babylonian army to reclaim the throne of Egypt, he was likely killed in the battle of with Amesis's forces. Amesis thus secured his kingship over Egypt and was then the unchallenged ruler of Egypt. So there you have it. Amesis ended up defeating Apries, even though Apries had the Babylonian army backing him. Apries was defeated by his own general, by one of his own soldiers, and also his other soldiers that were under that general, because these soldiers were tired of being disappointed by Apries and his various failures. First, starting with the siege of Jerusalem, which he lost miserably, then the battle at Libya. And then, they lost again, and he wasn't able to protect them. And then, here you have it. They choose Amesis instead. And when you go into the history of Amesis or Amosis II, it's actually mentioned about how he fought against Apries, and Apries was strangled to death by his own men. So that goes in line with Jeremiah 44:30. About how Pharaoh Hofer was given into the hands of them that sought his life, which were his own men. So with that, would you brothers like to add anything? Good. So with that, we want to give all praises to Yahweh, Bashem, Yahweh Shai, double honors to the elder apostles of Great Millstone, salutations to all the Akim out there pushing the word of Yahweh, Bashem, Yahweh Shai in truth and sincerity. With that, we hope this was edifying. Concerning the pharaohs that are mentioned in the scriptures by name, and with that we want to say shalom.